Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is one of the new late war German grenadiers from Victrix. Now folks got quite excited when they announced that they were moving into the 28mm size stuff for World War II, and I certainly was as well. Now they very kindly sent me along a pack of these guys to review, and I figured, well, they're bloody good, so I'm looking forward to doing that. And so at last, here we go. The painting in this one will also be included, so if you're interested in how to get a fairly close approximation of Sumpfmuster, which is as much fun to paint as it is to say, follow along. Timestamps will let you jump around to what you fancy. All of the paints will be listed in the description below, so let's start by getting a look at these miniatures. Here we go. So when you open up your bag, this is what you're going to end up with on your table. The little booklet, definitely keep hold of this. This is your instruction booklet and all that. And it's wonderful. We'll talk about that in a minute though. What you'll find as well is you've got the heavy weapons team on top, or the heavy weapons teams rather, this frame here. I'm going to put that aside. And then you've got 4 identical frames which each have 10 men on them. So the first thing to do is to take one of them and put it aside straight away. This is going to be your officers, your medic, your Panzerschreck teams, ammo bearers for the heavy weapon teams, and so forth. These are the sort of additional guys for the platoon. Pop them aside, and that way you know you've always got them there. You're not going to make any mistakes with assembly. Otherwise, each individual frame, like I said, 10 dudes, all unique, this is a section, or a squad, or a gruppe, whatever it is. Now each of these, I'll make sure in the description there is a link to the product itself so you can check out, because they do have the instructions up online. And that'll help you see that each of these guys, there are normally 3 or 4 assembly options, so they've got different weapons choices and what have you. A couple of them only have 2 options. I think it's just the NCO and one of the riflemen. And there is actually one guy who has 5 assembly options. So you're not going to be hurting for options for how they're going to look. Now, one of the things that I really do like about the set as well is that most of the riflemen actually have not just an aiming and shooting, but there's also like a carrying pose, and normally there's I think 3 or 4 of them that have a reloading pose, which is pretty cool. There's 1 or 2 poses as well that aren't really covered in other sets that I've seen, and they are all pretty natural. There's 1 or 2 of them which, depending on which weapon option you give them, they do stand a little bit stiffly. I think a couple of the aiming and firing guys look just a little bit wooden. But having assembled a couple of them, I didn't notice it as much when I had the actual miniature in front of me. So maybe that's something which, once they're painted up, you really won't see on the table. But they are fantastic. Now, side by side, there is the Warlord guy on the left. He is one of the Grenadiers from the plastic box set, and our Victrix chappie is on the right there. So you'll see that overall, poses notwithstanding, they're about the same size. If you do clip the puddle bases off all of the feet from the Victrix dudes, they'll be a millimeter and a half shorter, but otherwise they're about the same size. The proportions, so size of the head and hands, well, their heads are a little bit smaller. Their hands are about the same sort of size, so they do still have a slightly, air quotes, heroic scale to them. They're a little bit bigger than the Perry Miniatures dudes by comparison. But again, if you were to cut off the puddle bases, I think they'd fit in quite well with one another. Honestly, an army of these guys, if you wanted to mix them, wouldn't look too bad, I would suggest. But you get so many in the box that you do have a platoon of the Victrix fellas to begin with, so that's up to you if you do need to mix them at all. However, for comparison's sake, there we go. Everybody always asks. And then I said I was going to talk about the booklet itself, and finally, Victrix, I love you guys. This is beautiful. The assembly guide is completely color-coded. So both the main infantry frame and the heavy weapons, you know which bits are going to go where. And it is so much easier than the little lists of part H1 is compatible with body H2 and so forth, that, there are instructions essentially with other Victrix kits, but this is just gorgeous. So if I flip this over, example there, it's wonderful. Now, a couple of things that I did discover while I was assembling these guys is that some of these left arms, which are going to be attached to the arms with the weapons, they're a little bit fiddly. I did find it quite tricky to essentially glue on the rifle arm and then glue on the little support arm first. What I did find was easier was actually to go ahead, clip off the weapons together with the left arm, then glue the sleeve arm to the hand itself. And while it's still wet, you got a little bit of wiggle room, you can then start positioning it against the body to make sure that you've got the fit right. I did find that gluing the arm to the body first actually made fitting them a little bit more tricky. It's not impossible, but just something to bear in mind. I found that simpler, especially because a lot of these left arms are so small. So trying to fit your fingers in once the rifle is in the way of the body and so forth, just bear that one in mind. So yeah, what do I think of the kit? It's pretty brilliant, actually. So let's go ahead and pop some paint on a fella. So here is our volunteer for today. Now in the set, a few of the bodies are wearing the Zeltbahn either ponchos or covers, and then you've got the guys who are wearing these reversible smocks. Now these you could quite happily paint up with the Waffen SS colors. They would be accurate as well. However, on the website where Victrix has got these guys up, there are actually a few who are pictured wearing what's called Sumpfmuster. And that was it's a funny sound. It literally means swamp pattern. Now that was introduced in very late 1943, and it was mostly on the Eastern Front, but you would see some examples through in Normandy as well. So just for variety's sake, that's how I'm going to paint this fella today. Now to start off with, I've hit this fella with a primer spray of ash grey from the Army Painter. I'd recommend anything sort of light, so uniform grey or lighter. It also doesn't necessarily have to be a grey. Even a bone colour will work for a lot of the colours that we're going to apply to this fella. Grey is just a nice neutral for him. To start him off here, this is Ruddy Umber, and we're going to paint in his skin. Now this I'm going to start with because it's one of those areas where we're most likely to make a mistake if we come back and paint this over everything else. So start with the areas that it doesn't matter too much if you're a bit messy. Now once that has dried, we're going to start laying down the base colors for our camo. Now starting here, this is Camo Sand, and this is from the historical range. I'm pretty certain this is more aimed at the helmets and what have you for the Afrika Korps rather than the ordinary camo smocks. But because the Sumpfmuster was a little bit more yellow to begin with, this is going to work fine. So I'm going to cover over all of his smock here. Now after a couple of coats, we have there our nice solid Camo Sand. And I think I am right in that that is intended more as your Afrika Korps equipment. So anything that's going to be painted like helmets or mess tins and what have you in the desert, that's more the Camo Sand that's talking about. However, we're going to move on now to the helmet cover, and this I'm going to use Tomb King Tan on. Reason being, now, as far as I could find, there weren't helmet covers that were actually manufactured in Sumpfmuster, so I'm going to paint this in a more traditional Zeltbahn cover. Now, when it comes to the camouflage pattern itself, on the Sumpfmuster, this is predominantly green. You want roughly half and half green and beige on the miniature itself. So I'm going to start out here. What I have is some army green, and you want to start painting little lines that become geometric shapes. So jagged edges where you can manage it. And remember as well that we are going for a sort of impressionist look. We don't want to accurately recreate this camo, otherwise it will work, and then our miniature basically disappears on the table. Now remember when you come to areas like straps, sleeves and what have you, not to stop at the edges of them, because it will look unnatural if you do that. So moving through, making little blotches of colour. If your paint turns out to be a little bit too thin and you end up with a slightly fuzzy edge, for Sumpfmuster, that won't matter. That'll actually look quite good. Okay, now as you can see, we're not too worried about a perfect pattern. It is the distribution and the amount of the color that really matters here. So what I'm going to turn to now, this is Camo Brown. This one's also in the German paint set. And you could also use here something like Ruddy Terror from the John Blanche line. That would work quite well. But these little reddish brown blotches, there were not many of them in the Sumpfmuster at all. So pop them close to where the green starts. Just little blotches here and there. And you're really only adding a few. The idea here is just to break up some of the distribution of that green and beige. Now I have applied here what would probably be in reality more than you would see in a real Sumpfmuster pattern. But that's enough that from table distance, it's going to help us see what the pattern is supposed to be. Now we'll move on to the helmet cover. Now we'll follow a similar method for the helmet cover. Now I'm going to use Bootstrap Brown as the brown on this. And I tend to find little triangular patterns are the easiest way to get what looks a bit more random. So little triangles, remembering to branch off and go up to the edges of any areas of color. But yeah, we'll do the same thing here on the helmet cover. Then I'm going to grab here some Woodland Camo, and we're going to make similar shapes. And these are going to be slightly larger than they are for the red, or the brown rather, in the Sumpfmuster. This color scheme is closer to sort of thirds of each, so you can add a bit more green here. As well, if you want, you can just use army green for this, but the Woodland Camo is going to stand out a little bit more prominently here, and I think that's worth it. The last detail to actually paint on the smock itself would be the turn back on the collar, which will be white. But the collar of his shirt is going to make that a little bit tricky, so we'll paint that first. I have here mid Feldgrau, and unsurprisingly this one is from the historical range. So I'm going to paint in his collar, and of course his trousers with this as well. If you had a fellow who had exposed sleeves, big surprise, those would be Feldgrau too. And then finally, the turn back on the collar and the laces as well, we're going to pop in with Great Hall Grey. And if you're feeling particularly saucy, you can use that step to also paint in the little white stripes on his collar tabs. Whew! Now that's a fair bit of work, but once you get your eye in and you are painting a few guys at a time, it'll start to pass much more quickly. Now we can move on and start painting his other equipment, finally. So spinning him around and having a look at his gear here, you'll see I have already popped a little bit of that mid-Feldgrau on what would be the gas cape, on the outside of the gas cape canister, because I'll use them for carrying all sorts of things. What I'm going to turn to is actually dark Feldgrau. Any really dark green will work quite well here. What I'm going to paint this on is the metallic bits. So the gas canister, or gas mask canister itself, and also his mess tin. Now the mess tins, these came in all sorts of greens. They would also sometimes just be steel, so you could paint that in with gunmetal later if you wanted. Now his bread bag and his gaiters, what I'm going to use here is Tundra Taupe. These would have been a fairly similar canvas color, although his bread bag you may choose to paint a little bit more green. Something like Tainted Forest from the John Blanche line would work well here. Now, I do find that my Tundra Taupe coming out of my pot is a little thick, so if yours is as well, just add a little bit of water and you'll see it covers perfectly well. Now the water bottle cover is nice and simple, leather brown over this. You could also do it a little bit lighter with some paratrooper tan if you wanted. It's just a brown felt sort of color. I tell you what, this is why I like painting British troops. Uniform is one color, equipment is one color, nice and simple. Anyhow, we're going to move on. I have here Rifle Brown. This is another one from the historical range, and I'll give you a clue what it's really good at. Now, this is a nice warm red. There was a fair bit of variation in some of the Kar98Ks as well, so if you've got the British paint set, or you just fancy picking up a couple of the colors when they're available individually, then Mud Spatter is another very good color for the rifles. I just realized I was getting a little ahead of myself there, but the leather sling and the leather strap across his helmet, or across his chin if he's wearing it that way, I'm using here, this is Tree Ancient. You might want to go a little bit darker if you want a bit more contrast between these two areas, but once we paint in the black details on the rifle, it will look fine. Now as boots, I'm going to use here oak brown, and this will also work for darker leather if you like. These could also be painted in black. Now at last comes the part where everything starts to come together. What I have is strap grey, and we're going to use this for anything which is either blackened leather or blackened metal. So on his rifle, the metal parts with this, spin him round, the cover on his water bottle, the straps on his mess tin, so on and so forth. Anything which is black, essentially, we're going to use strap grey rather than a pure black, because it's going to look a little more interesting when we shade it. Funnily enough, we're also going to paint his straps with strap grey. Now it is a little tricky to actually show you on camera, but some areas I tend to find it easiest to start by flipping them upside down and start from the bottom and paint my way up. So just something to bear in mind. If you are struggling with painting straight up and down, try it in reverse. Now once you finish with those base coats, cruise around and do any bits of tidy up that you need to now. Leave that stage to last because it will be quickest then. What I've done is mixed up in my little well over here. This is 2 parts strong tone to 1 part speed paint medium. Mostly because I want the shading, but I don't want the tone to be quite so dark. You'll see going on, it will still tint the color a little bit, but what I'm going to do is as I apply it, just shift it around. So you want to concentrate so that it is settling in the recesses, any bits of detail, but flatter areas, try and shift it away from. So this takes a bit of practice. I see folks saying, oh, it doesn't work and it makes my miniatures muddy. I was like, well, yeah, it can do, but it's because you can't just throw it on and expect it to do all of the work for you. You do need to apply it, give it a couple of seconds, and then shift it as you need to. Luckily, this mix will work for the entire miniature, so going over everything. Once it's applied, we'll leave it for about half an hour and see what we get once it has dried. And once that's dried, we've got plenty of shading, and yeah, it dulls down the color a little bit so that the camouflage doesn't look quite so vibrant, which works rather well. What I'm going to do now is just a couple of highlights. What I've mixed up here, this is half and half mid and light Feldgrau. Now you can of course just use light Feldgrau, but I would suggest that that is going to look pretty bright. Just neat over the top of what we've done so far. I think it's going to be a little more intense than you might like. But with that mix, what I'm going to do is just pick out a few of the highest points and creases. Just give a little bit more shape to the trousers. Now on his skin, we're going to cover over most of that again with agate skin, leaving just a little bit of the recessed stuff shaded. And then some barbarian flesh, just to highlight areas like his chin, his cheekbones. Now this is easiest if you just do a little sort of L shape on the side of his face there, tip of his nose, and the backs of his knuckles. Now what I've got is some ancient stone on the small dry brush from the Army Painter. Now the reason why I'm using this is that the wedge tip is going to help me get into some of these areas without hitting bits of uniform and what have you that I don't want to hit with this ancient stone. I've also done videos where I have painstakingly gone over some of the camo pattern by mixing the original color, normally about half and half, with something like ancient stone or a ivory or what have you. But since we are looking to save a little bit of time here, what we're doing is just catching the exposed edges of the uniform to add a little bit more texture to what we've done. So take your time here, because it is the possibility of being very messy is there, but you can also be quite precise in your dry brushing if you are careful about how you do it. So over both the smock and the helmet will probably be a little bit easier. Now I have in actual fact gone over his face, his trousers a little bit with that, and some of his equipment. As you go over the uniform, what you'll find is that you're leaving less and less paint behind. And once you've got next to nothing on your brush, you can start experimenting with other places to lightly tickle with that dry brush. It will add quite a bit to some areas. The last thing I'm going to do is get a little bit of gunmetal, and I'm going to touch in just a few of the areas where those little buckles are, and we'll be done. So what I'm going to do then is to take him outside, hit him with a matte varnish. I'm going to do just a little bit on his gun here as well. And I will apply his base to him as well. And the recipe for that will be in the description. So let's get a look at last. What does this fella look like when he is all finished? And so there at last, our Panzer Grenadier is complete. Now these guys are really cool. I think the range of what you're able to do with them makes for some interesting painting. Whether you are going to use them as Panzer Grenadiers or SS, even slightly differently equipped Fallschirmjäger, it's not 100% accurate for the Fallschirmjäger, but you can fudge it a little, I would say. The kit's brilliant, and for anything from late 1943 to the end of the war, these guys are going to see some use. You could even go the route of painting them with the reversed smocks, do them in white jackets, and have them out on the Eastern Front in the snow, or even in the early stages of the Battle of the Bulge. There's a lot to do with these. I think they're really cool. So thanks again goes to Victrix for letting me have a back of these guys, because they are brilliant, and I think it's my next hobby project sorted from them. As well, thanks go to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, and as well, all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked down there too. So, thank you very much for all of your time today, folks. You all enjoy the rest of your day.